The atmosphere over Pebble Ridge National still trembled long after the final putt dropped. The assembled crowd, passionate and unrestrained, erupted into a tempest that felt less like celebration and more like the release of something primal. Banners waved, voices roared, and flashes of team colors filled the autumn twilight. It should have been a moment of triumph, the kind that would resonate through golf's distinguished history. Yet beneath the cheers, there was a murmur, a question. Had golf just crossed a boundary from which it could never retreat? The Continental Cup has always been more than a tournament. It's golf's pulse, where pride, rivalry, and respect converge. However, in 2025, something fractured. The jeers overwhelmed the applause, the insults cut deeper than the competition. Debris was thrown, tempers ignited, and even the most experienced champions stood bewildered. What should have been an exhibition of sportsmanship had transformed into a theater of disorder. Marshall Henderson, once the embodiment of Continental Cup honor, stated he was ashamed of what he witnessed. Offering a rare public apology on behalf of the home fans, that word shamed hung in the atmosphere like a wound no one wished to acknowledge. It made even the devoted pause and wonder. Had the sport's elegance been consumed by its own fervor? Then came Victor Brennan, blunt, fearless, and furious. The 9-time major champion called it the most disappointing event in professional sport. Not because of the golf itself, but because of what surrounded it. He said the cacophony drowned out the grace. The anger smothered the artistry. His words struck a nerve, cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. The Continental Cup had not just been contested. It had been exposed suddenly. It wasn't only about who won or lost. It was about what the game itself had become. If the legends were losing faith, what remained to believe in? The headlines came swiftly, the debates faster. Fans defended, critics condemned. Golf's pristine image, quiet, orderly, noble, was shattered. The 2025 Continental Cup hadn't crowned a hero. It had revealed a crisis. And while the world argued, one man stayed silent. Until now, when the dust of Pebble Ridge settled and the headlines began to fade, one voice remained absent, the voice that had defined an era. Jackson Mitchell watched the chaos of the 2025 Continental Cup, not from the fairways, but from a distance. Cameras caught glimpses of him at his residence in coastal California, quiet, contemplative, a world removed from the noise that consumed the tournament. It wasn't that Jackson didn't care. It was that he understood when silence spoke louder than words. And for a while, his silence became the most powerful sound in golf. Everyone wondered what he was thinking. Months earlier, Mitchell had already shocked fans by declining the captaincy position. According to tournament reports, he said he couldn't dedicate the time the role demanded. His body was still recovering. His commitments to the tour and various projects were relentless. It was a practical decision, but fans didn't interpret it that way. Too many, Jackson's refusal felt like more than scheduling. It felt symbolic, as if the greatest player of the modern era was quietly stepping back from the chaos golf had created for itself. Was he protecting his legacy, or making a statement, without uttering a word? In truth, Jackson's relationship with the Continental Cup has never been straightforward. Archives resurfaced his old comments. From 1998, when he'd called the event an exhibition rather than a true championship, back then people viewed it as arrogance, a young champion too focused on individual glory. But now in hindsight, those remarks resonated differently. Perhaps he wasn't dismissing the cup. Perhaps he was warning it. Warning what could transpire when ego, spectacle, and noise replaced respect. The same noise that now defined Pebble Ridge was Jackson's old prophecy finally materializing? For months, he said nothing. No statement, no social media post, just silence. Deliberate, disciplined, unnerving. Fans filled that silence with theories. Some thought he was furious. Others believed he was heartbroken. But those who knew him best saw something else: composure. Jackson wasn't absent. He was waiting. Waiting for the world to quiet down enough to actually hear him. And when he finally spoke, his words didn't echo. They cut. When Jackson Mitchell finally broke his silence, it wasn't before flashing cameras or a roaring audience. It was in his quiet, deliberate manner, calm voice, steady gaze, no theatrics. He spoke, not to defend anyone, but to remind everyone. Golf, he said, has always been a game of respect, for the course, for your opponent, and for yourself. There was no anger, no accusation, just a steady truth that cut through months of chaos. It wasn't noise that people heard that day. It was clarity. He acknowledged the tension, the crowd behavior, and the disappointment that defined Pebble Ridge. But Jackson didn't point fingers. Instead, he turned the lens back on everyone who loves the sport. We all share responsibility, he said, to keep the game what it's always been, something honorable. For him, the problem wasn't passion. It was the loss of restraint, the surrender to impulse. He called on players, fans, and even officials to reclaim golf's dignity. A phrase that would resonate across clubhouses and press rooms for weeks. In an age of noise, Jackson was asking for quiet. He praised the opposing captain's poise under pressure, a subtle nod to leadership rooted in calm, not chaos. Without naming names, Mitchell made his point clear. Greatness doesn't shout, it breathes. His tone wasn't nostalgic. It was urgent. He warned that if golf traded grace for spectacle, it would lose something far more valuable than trophies. You can't build legacy on disrespect, he said softly. The line felt less like commentary and more like creed. It was Jackson, the philosopher of discipline, returning to protect the soul of his sport. In that moment, the narrative shifted. Fans who had spent months debating the behavior at Pebble Ridge suddenly had something higher to focus on: integrity. Mitchell didn't give the sport answers. He gave it a mirror. And in that reflection, golf saw not just its mistakes, but its potential to be better. Jackson hadn't just spoken his mind. He'd reminded golf of its conscience. Jackson's words rippled through the game like a gentle tide turning stone. Within days, other legends followed, not to contradict him, but to echo what they'd long felt. Marshall Henderson, still shaken from the scenes at Pebble Ridge, called Mitchell's message a breath of truth the game needed. For Henderson, it was redemption, a bridge between shame and accountability. He said, "We can't change the crowd overnight, but we can change the example we set." It was a humble concession from one of golf's proudest guardians. The old guard wasn't angry anymore. They were ready to rebuild. Victor Brennan, whose earlier outburst branded the event the most disappointing in professional sport, softened his tone after Jackson's comments. He admitted his frustration came from love for a game that once demanded decorum. Jackson reminded us what golf means, he said, and perhaps we all needed reminding. His words carried a tone of reflection rather than rage. Brennan, once furious, now sounded hopeful. Even the loudest critics found calm in Jackson's honesty. William Townsend, ever the voice of legacy, added his weight to the movement. In an interview with a major sports publication, he reflected on Jackson's statement with admiration. "That's what leadership looks like," Townsend said. "Not volume, but vision." He proposed new standards, more authority for officials to control fan behavior, clearer codes of conduct for both spectators and players. The conversation was evolving. What had begun as outrage was becoming reform. The game was beginning to listen to itself again, together. These voices, Henderson, Brennan, Townsend, formed a chorus of wisdom anchored by Mitchell's calm conviction. Across social media, podcasts, and practice greens, a new phrase surfaced: protect the game. It wasn't a slogan. It was a mission. Golf's legends had turned frustration into purpose, criticism into stewardship. And as their message spread, something long forgotten began to stir: the quiet pride that once defined the game. Perhaps the 2025 Continental Cup wasn't golf's fall from grace. Perhaps it was its wake-up call. What happened at Pebble Ridge, with its chaos and confrontation, stripped the sport bare. But in that vulnerability, something powerful began to grow. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about responsibility, a shared one. Jackson Mitchell's words didn't accuse. They awakened. They reminded fans, players, and leaders that golf's greatness was never in its noise, but in its quiet strength. Sometimes the only way to heal a tradition is to break it open first. In the weeks that followed, Strange calm settled over the sport. You could feel it in locker rooms, in practice ranges, in the way commentators spoke with a little more care. Players started shaking hands longer. Fans started cheering with more consideration. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The honesty of legends like Mitchell, Townsend, and Henderson had become the mere golf needed to see itself clearly again. For once, the headlines weren't about controversy or chaos. They were about reflection. The noise was fading, and in its place, respect was making a quiet return. Tournament organizers began discussions about new guidelines, real authority for marshals, stricter codes for crowd conduct, better mental health resources for players. These weren't punishments. They were promises that the sport would protect what made it special, its integrity.